Hello, this is Christopherova. Welcome to another episode of the Strategy Skills podcast. Our podcast sponsor today is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is a free download. Go to firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. It is firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And if you're currently updating your resume, you can get McKinsey and BCG winning resume example. It is an example of resume that got offers from both firms, and you can get it at firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. And today we are speaking with Martin Gonzalez and Josh Yellin. Martin is the creator of Google's Effective Founders Project and a frequent lecturer at Stanford, Wharton and INSEAD. And Josh co-founded Google's first Startup Accelerator and is presently an organizational leader at Google DeepMind. Welcome, Martin and Josh.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You recently co-authored the Bonfire Moment book. And would you say that if you had to summarize your book to a main point, would you say it would be that startup founders need to stop ignoring people issues in favor of technical, financial, strategic issues?
100%. In fact, what would have been a subtitle of our book was Why Building Teams is Harder Than Building Tech. And we make the case in the book around why it's often ignored for tech because tech is frankly more exciting to talk about. But B, that it's just as critical, in fact, more critical to the success and survival of a startup, that they get the people stuff right.
And it is, of course, not just specific for startups, but it is also an issue that is overlooked within large organizations. You can also, if you think about what makes a very successful leader, even within a very large organization, it is often the soft skills that get them very effective because technical skills at some point can only take you up to a certain point.
Yeah, it's the soft skills that allow you to scale your team and scale through yourself. And so, we talk about, and highlight some of our most effective founders that we've come across in our book and different tactics and things that they've done to sort of help scale a culture and scale themselves throughout a growing team that's growing often quickly. But, same applies to larger companies as well. If you're going to be a larger manager or a larger leader with a growing team, larger org size, et cetera, you're getting the soft stuff, the communication, the people side right, especially up front is really important.
I want to say something about this idea of soft skills. I think, to Josh's point, I think it's interesting the choice of words we use as well, right? It's soft, therefore it's maybe not hard or difficult or challenging. And we often say something like, and we write this in the book, we often say something like, oh, it's not rocket science. What's ironic is that as a humanity, as a species, we're actually really good at rocket science. We can launch, a rocket to the moon and land within like 2 kilometers of our estimates. But we're not that precise or that good at the people stuff, unfortunately. In fact, the very rocket scientists that try to do this work are pretty, terrible at the people stuff. And so while I acknowledge that that's the language we use, like there's something incredibly hard about the soft stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're so right. Such a good observation. Why are we calling it soft skills? And you can see it everywhere as you're developing yourself as a leader. I remember during MBA, for example, everyone is looking down on developing soft skills, not realizing how crucial it will become the more senior they become. Yes, when you're junior, it's not that important. You can get by with very good technical skills. But then once you get to more and more senior levels, you're dead if you don't have good soft skills. So,
yeah.
Josh, you mentioned just now that you spoke to some of the very effective founders, and in your book, you mentioned many examples. Maybe you could highlight some of the most memorable things that particular founders did that made them particularly excellent at managing their teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So something, and this is kind of near and dear to my heart, but I think it extends. Well, our research has shown that it does extend beyond sort of the nonprofit mindset into the for-profit sort of business mindset. But is starting as a leader, starting an organization or a team with a very mission-oriented sort of grounding point for its culture. And founders that we've found have been really successful at doing that, are able to yield a lot of what we call discretionary effort out of their teams. So, essentially like getting beyond what would be sort of baseline acceptable performance and getting a lot of people beyond the scope of the leadership team, putting in that extra mile. And we have a lot of stories in the book about, very moving stories of people, maybe frontline employees going above and beyond to deliver something for their customers, literally or figuratively, because of the tone that's set at the top with regards to a groundedness in mission, a groundedness in meaning in what you're doing.
I really like the story about the guy who covered a puzzle with his jacket and the gas principle related to that.
Yes.
So let's talk about some examples, because I think those stories will help highlight how people can get better at building and managing their teams.
I agree that story. So for the sake of your audience, so in the book, we talk about Aldi Haryapratomo, who's a founder based in Jakarta. And Aldi, who we meet in one of Google's accelerators in Singapore, he talks about how he's learned a lot from observing like mega churches and cult groups, and like how do these cult founders kind of master the human psychology. This is the one thing that he and I actually could spend a day talking about. And he talks about a story where he gets a phone call from one of the customers, and his business is at this time, he's since sold it, but his business is an e-commerce business for underserved population. So these are like the more rural parts of Indonesia. And he gets his phone call from this customer, and she says, "I am so impressed. It was storming that day, and I was pretty sure my delivery wouldn't come. But your delivery person shows up at my door completely drenched in the rain, but my package is completely dry. And what happens is that this guy removes his jacket, puts it on the merchandise as he takes his motorcycle through the rural streets to deliver this package." And if you think about that, like to Josh's point on discretionary effort, that really isn't that's not worth writing an article or blasting on social media about. But if you can imagine an employee that deep in the org, doing that single act of just caring a little bit more than what is maybe required of them. And if we think of multiplying that all across the company, like imagine the kind of performance you would see across the company.
Do you remember any other stories, any other principles or anything that he learned from studying churches and so on and cults that he's actually used for his businesses?
So he has learned that ritual and symbolism are really important in leading an organization. So I remember visiting one of his one of the regional kind of offices. There was this, I guess it was like a vase where it was this highly personalized vase with all these random, and it didn't particularly look that like artistic, but he was talking about how the women in that community who were, supporting, I say women because I mean that literally, like his community was microfinance, and a lot of this was, kind of bring the women together to kind of start businesses, because we know that, and he shared this with me, that for every dollar you give through a woman in Indonesia, like most of that actually ends up with the family, as opposed to, the men who maybe will use it for other things. And so he would gather them, and then every Monday morning when they gather, there is a song that is sung. There is a commitment that they talk about around their families and, building a future of financial freedom. And then the symbolism of this vase was something that was put together at some point that symbolized their commitment to these higher ideals. And he was big on that. And you think about kind of the ritualistic aspect of being in an organized religion. Like some of that allows you to scale certain messages and norms and cultural beliefs, a lot more pervasively than if you relied on a single person who had to repeat the messages over and over again.
Very true. In your book, you mentioned that according to researchers from Harvard Business School and McKinsey, 65% of startups fail because of people issues and not because of flawed technology, misguided product, lack of cash. And the vast majority fail because they can't figure out how to get the right team on board and then working well together. And then, of course, removing team members that are basically causing harm to the culture. Why do you think we seem to be trained to hide the complicated reality of this human collaboration and all the issues that are happening under the hood?
It's because it's painful. It's not something that's easy to admit to. It again, this whole idea of like, this should be easy stuff, right? The people stuff should be easy stuff. And if I'm not kind of getting it right, then there must be something dysfunctional about my team, myself. We talk quite a bit in the book as well around the brag culture that we've seen in almost every startup ecosystem in the world that we've done this, these workshops at. And the challenge about this brag culture is everywhere you go, it seems like everyone is doing really well. Like, we've expanded to new markets, we've raised this amount of cash, we've hired these many employees. And psychologists have this thing called pluralistic ignorance, which is when people behave a certain way because they know what others are expecting around them. And if, let's say, I come into a startup gathering and everyone feels they need to talk about their latest achievements, and I do the same and everyone does the same, privately, I know that I am not particularly like crushing it in my role, but I perceive that everyone is. And so I come home every day thinking, oh, I might, it might just be me. And I think some of that brag culture also mutes out a lot of the willingness to talk about some of the hardest challenges of the journey.
Yeah, and I'd add that it's just, and Martin touched on this, but it's just so much more personal, right? Like a startup journey, a lot of the brag culture is around product and performance and funds raised, and all these are kind of like outside yourself, just as a person. And when you get into a lot of these interpersonal issues, the people stuff, you have to really think about yourself. Like, how am I communicating to those around me? Am I ineffective at how I am expressing myself? Am I able to handle this tough feedback? And it's much more personal, and it's a harder thing to look at, right? It's much easier to discuss and share things outside yourself. So, we go in the book, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but a lot of what we do in the workshop is sort of peeling these layers back. The workshop that we recommend in the book is peeling these vulnerability layers back and getting to a place where people can share things about themselves. And because it's on a day-to-day basis, when it's straight business, it's not commonplace.
Very true. Another thing that is going on there is people just under so much pressure. And also
Yes.
it is combined with the fact that in our mind, soft things are not as important. So people
Yeah.
live in all this, we think, oh, we'll just put it under the rug and deal with it later on. We just need to survive this. We just need to not run out of cash. We just need to hire this person because we have this big gap in skills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're always important, but they're rarely as urgent as some of these more sort of, like we've been saying, hard or business oriented problems. But yeah, we make the case in the book that it's very important. Sometimes doesn't feel urgent, but if you keep putting it off, you're going to have an insurmountable problem that actually, will put away 65% of all startups, which is people-oriented sort of issues.
Startup leaders find it very difficult to recruit good people, and they take too long to let go of unproductive and toxic teammates. What will be your advice on how recruitment of good people can be done better?
I think it starts with understanding the psychology of top people, like the psychology of really excellent performers. The excellent performers, first of all, have options. So let's start with that premise. Secondly, they actually want to be working on tough, meaningful challenges. They don't want to be working on the nth e-commerce, or they want to be at the forefront. And so a lot of the times when founders come to us saying, I can't seem to hire, we start there. We start asking, okay, so how would you talk about the mission of this company? And some founders will, it's pretty clear to them, for me, this is simply about money, which is fine. There's no shame in that. And, it's important that people have needs, right? But if you were to go to a person you really want to recruit, and it was clear to them that you were not really passionate about this work, or it was not meaningful beyond the fact that it will put money in your pocket, like some of those things actually turn away the really good people. And then I would just say that once you get that narrative down and you can get really clear on what, why are we really doing this? Just there's so much more around. There's this really good story in some of the early days of Google. This is written up in Laszlo Bock's book, where at a time when Google was not actually known, instead of asking people for resumes, instead what they did was they gave people, Larry and Sergey gave their resumes to the people they wanted to recruit, as if to say, look, the reward of joining this unknown startup is that you get to work with these amazing people. And that's the biggest reward. And again, they understood the psychology of top people. They wanted to work with other brilliant people. So I think some of that could just really help, with hiring great people.
That is so important, and it is applicable well outside of startups. Really good people, unless it is a specific situation, let's say someone immigrated to another country and they have to start from scratch. They have to erase everything they have accomplished up to now and then have to start from scratch. Unless it is a situation like that, some kind of situation where in unusual circumstance, usually really good people, they are currently engaged with the current organization and they 100%
That's right.
Yeah, and something else is to build on what Martin said is, and we talk about this framework in the book, is like the motivating factors for individuals within an organization or an initiative wraps around like the head, the heart, and the wallet. So Martin talked about, touched on all the three of those, but to put it in in something tight, it's like startups are often strapped on the financial side, especially internationally, right? And something we talk to global founders about, outside of the Silicon Valley market and emerging markets, the people that might join the team, they're not surrounded by, so many sort of startups that have exited for billions of dollars. And so they're often just left paying people less than market rate. And so what they really need to lean on is the head and the heart. And so the head meaning, like the intellectual challenges, right? And being able to build a company that can foster and manifest those for talented people. And then the heart kind of gets back to the mission of social good, or what good are we going to do to the world if we're successful here together? And so, having the founders be very grounded in the head and the heart of what the value proposition is to these top talented folks very early, and being able to beat that drum. And Martin pointing out the Google example is a very good example of both of those things. And so, that's consistent in startups and in corporate America as well. But we found, especially going international with startups in other markets, that's something they really have to play to.
Let's talk now about letting go of unproductive and toxic teammates. What would be your advice?
The first thing is to say that this is hard stuff. In fact, this is maybe easily the biggest heartburn that we find founders having to grapple with it. And by the way, like in a startup environment, this might be your best friend that you recruited early on. And now that you're at a different scale of the company, what do you do with them? In a corporate setting, it might be, the person that you've collaborated with for years, and they're just not interested in how the strategy is going to pivot. And so how do we let them go? So the first thing I would say up front is check your local laws, because there's some stuff around things that you could do or not do. In America, for instance, like it's a lot easier than in many international markets where we advise. So that's the first stop we ask people to do. And we're not lawyers. We're not employment lawyers. But I think the second one is you need to have a pre-agreed, and it's important it's pre-agreed, mechanism to give people feedback and then figure out like what is the appropriate way to actually offboard someone from a team. This is sometimes most of the time, by the way, like founding teams who are so obsessed about the product. These are one of the things that they've just never come around to talking about. What if I don't scale? What is the best way to either help me get back on track, or finally say like, look, it's not working and we just need to part ways. And in some ways, the workshop we've built, the Bonfire Moment, we never, the number one goal of that workshop is to bring teams together. But every now and again, through these very vulnerable conversations, very open conversations, we find startups actually part ways because they finally have the avenue to talk very openly about some of these challenges. And so I think for me, prevention is better than cure. So as early as possible, talk about those worst case scenarios. So that when the time comes where you need to trigger a worst case scenario, it's half as painful in that process.
Yeah, and I think Martin hit it right on the head with like when you get to the point where you gotta let somebody go, and which is the question you asked. But like a lot of what we also bring to the table with, especially the workshop in the book, is a process in which you might be able to prevent a burning out relationship due to just having some discussions, maybe getting to the root cause of what the problem might seem to be. And it might be less of a performance issue and more of a communication issue or something. So I'm not going to argue that sometimes you don't have to let people go, and Martin spoke to that really well. But something that we've also seen is damaged relationships that might yield to a founder splitting away, or a breakup of the founding team, or even laying off a seemingly high performer but poor behavior sort of candidate in their team, and just sort of finding the space to really discuss what the core issue is, understand it, and sometimes work through it. So I just want to call out that there are ways to work through seemingly insurmountable sort of people issues. But to your question, Chris, and to Martin's answer, sometimes you get to a point where you have to part ways. But I just wanted to call out that some of what we bring to the table with this book is preventative. An ounce of prevention is more than a pound of cure, is what they say. So a lot of hitting these things early on will help you hire right, will help you retain the right people, and prevent getting to that breaking point. But inevitably, sometimes it happens, of course.
Of course. Martin and Josh, you are both very accomplished leaders, managing teams, huge level of experience. Could you share some of the red flags you identified in your careers of people that you later on, it became obvious that this person was really a wrong hire?
Yeah, so for me, and I'll be repeating myself a little bit, but it's not exactly, is somebody who kind of early on showed colors of being me first over team first. And so, I think there's always a time and a place for people to have conversations about themselves and their career. But again, it goes back to hiring right, and then making sure you're building the team the right way. And if you build a team with a lot of team players, you're going to go a lot further. And so I've brought somebody on who in the past, and this has happened a couple times, but hopefully not too many more times, who expressed some self-interest in the interview process, maybe a little more than I'd seen otherwise. And this is just personal story, right? But that's something that I look out for very cautiously now, and I ask my colleagues who are going to be interviewing candidates to be looking out for that as well. So that's just a personal account for myself. Yeah.
Maybe I can throw in and share a story of someone who I was so ready to let go of. And after a good conversation of feedback and of just being curious and asking, changed my mind almost completely. I was working with a junior person who showed some basic like levels of like lack of professionalism. So wouldn't submit things on time. Just the very basic stuff. And I thought this is just unacceptable. It's reliability is such a basic, quality to have in these, in any professional role. And so I sat down with him, and before I couched it as here's some feedback for you, I just approached it with some curiosity. I said, hey, last Friday, when you said you'd send it in at 5 p.m., I still remember this. This is years ago now. Can you help me understand what was going through your mind? As you decide not to actually meet the deadline and go beyond? And what he said really changed my thinking about, how I, worked with people around me. He said, you know, the bar of excellence in your team is so high that I make a choice at 5 p.m. Do I either submit it on time below the quality bar, or do I wait and submit something better but late? And in that moment, I realized, okay, so this is not fully on him, but this is on me as well to really help figure out, like, what can I do to support my team a lot better. That was one of the moments where I learned quite a bit as a manager, like how I can, better support my team.
And I guess one argument here would be he should still let you know that he is submitting late.
This is right. And but it's not nearly as egregious as I first thought, where I would be willing to let him go. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, like, what are some of the green flags instead of red flags? It's just like high quality communicators are really helpful to just be hiring and embedding in your organization. They, whether you're at the top or in the middle or on the front lines, it's, it solves for so many of these issues, right?
Very true. And then they set good example for other people, just lift everyone.
Yeah. Yes.
So you guys are working with startup founders all over the world. What patterns are you noticing? What things are you noticing that are very similar across and very different when it comes to people issues?
Yeah. So we write in one of the chapters in the book on the trap of confidence, and that I think by far is something that we've seen all across. The trap of confidence is where we find that founders have this expectation that as I get better in what I do, my confidence grows over time. But we actually find from our data, and this data we've collected around the world, that the confidence is usually highest when they're not effective in their role. And as they get better at doing the work and they realize, just what great looks like, then their confidence drops. And then some people will assume, well, maybe that's more a feature of, certain cultures, perhaps, the cultures that are more, extroverted and, more where confidence is a bigger feature of that culture. Perhaps that doesn't apply to them. Actually, it's it's exactly not the case. Like it just so happens that in these brag cultures, a lot of these issues are masked. But everywhere we go, whether it's, by culture or even by gender, like there's a lot of people who you wouldn't expect would have struggles with confidence and self-doubt and insecurity. But everyone goes through it. And that's something that I think in some ways ties us all together as a human, race. Like, this is part of the human condition. And so, in our tour around the world, we bring across what we have very affectionately called the bullshit circle, which is a moment of, a very vulnerable, raw moment where we invite founders and leaders to talk about what are the biggest insecurities that I have in this work, and what are some of the masks I wear as I approach this work. So I think that's the one thing that we see just common all across. I think where things are a little bit, vary a little bit is depending on the kind of national culture you're in, there's a very different starting point when it comes to communication styles. So some environments will have very indirect communication styles. I grew up in the Philippines. I have mastered the art of indirect communication. And that's a very different fix when I would shy away from conflict constantly than if you come from a culture that is a lot more, high conflict or low conflict avoidant, very much willing to engage in conflict. And then there's a different fix. There's a different kind of correction point that needs to happen in those environments. But I'd say in those 2 points, yeah.
A lot of these interpersonal issues often start very small and deceptively insignificant, and people feel I should not be wasting time on it because I have such important things going on where if I fail, the company fails. So what would be your advice on how can leaders identify if the issue that may seem small actually demands their immediate attention?
Yes, it's such a good point. And we talk about in one of the chapters in our book, we call the trap of speed. we talk about the 20 things that we have seen as the most critical things to pay attention to. So that's too much to get through in this conversation, but it's things like, how do we want to spend our limited resources? Do we care about the flashy office, or do we want to continue to be scrappy? Do we make decisions based on intuition or based on data? And when data conflicts with our intuition, how do we go about resolving or coming to a decision point? It's even things like who becomes the face of this startup. We talk a bit about this idea of the invisible founder, where when it's not pre-agreed ahead of time, who will be the face of this work? There could be grievances around, feeling like, credit is being taken for the work that others are doing. So there is a hierarchy. There are issues that are bigger than others, and we summarize that. I think the main point here is that there's this effect that behavioral scientists have called the hyperbolic discounting, which is when the benefits of solving an issue are in the present, we're incredibly great as human beings at valuing the benefits of that. But when it comes to valuing things in the future, when the benefits come, a year from now, 5 years from now, which, by the way, a lot of these people issues are very much, future oriented in terms of benefits. Somehow we apply a discount factor. It's a little bit why it's easier to sell prescription drugs than it is to sell insurance, because insurance, you're giving away money for a future benefit, whereas prescription drugs, it's something that's, to cure something that's here and now.
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to everything Martin mentioned here, and this ties back into the Bonfire Moment workshop itself. And again, I kind of mentioned earlier that the workshop's built in a way where you slowly enable psychological safety to sort of snowball and build a very safe container for people to, the team members themselves to discuss issues, things that might be beneath the surface, things that maybe they thought only they were worried about, but were too afraid to bring up out of fear of, who knows what. But by the time we've kind of, after we've had this bullshit circle, we have a section that we call resolve unspoken issues. And this is, again, when everyone's kind of at their most vulnerable, has shared a lot. We basically created this safest container we can for that team to sit together. And everyone should feel it's at this point pretty safe to bring up things that they think, why aren't we looking at this? And we have a suggested list, like Martin said, so you can kind of go through and be like, let's all kind of circle, or let's name what we think is very top of mind as like critical issues that we need to talk about. And it just doesn't always happen on a day-to-day basis. Even on a day-to-day, let's say a daily stand-up or a weekly leadership meeting, you're probably stuck in the business cycle. And taking a day, which we're recommending here, to stop, pause, reflect, go deeper into some of these issues. Naturally, what I love about the workshop is it's not like we're forcing a lot of information in everybody's head, but we're creating a space and putting you through a process that will allow you to feel as safe as you can to unearth and share what you think might be your sinking issues. And so I just want to call that out, because a lot of it is the team has, the team members, they have so much context of their own companies. What you really often need to do is create a space for them to be able to, talk about these things deeply and in a meaningful way, and then leave together really with a fair amount of agreement and alignment on maybe, wow, why haven't we been thinking about this? And it's because we haven't really been discussing things at this depth, and we haven't felt safe enough to even share that this was something that felt dangerous or felt risky or whatever it might be. So I just want to point out that, without calling out even specifics, sometimes it's specific to the company. And what we're trying to do, part of what we're trying to do is help that company take in the least amount of time as possible, get to the safest space possible to share what they really think is causing them problems.
And when you run those exercises, do you do it with each startup breaks into the little group and they do all the exercises, or do you do it as a bigger group so everyone can see what is happening with other startups?
So we've done it in all different configurations, but through the book, basically we've taken the versions we've run it across the world, and we've boiled it down to 4 specific blocks of work that a team needs to go through. And it's written in a way where a team, whether it's an innovation team in a large company, or a leadership team for that matter, or a startup team, if they're a group of 5 or 7 people, they can gather together with a book in hand and walk through these steps together. And it works perfectly. I think there is value in understanding, well, what are some of the struggles of the other of other startup teams, but just starting with the team itself is really good. A big part of what we do in the workshop is we invite people to assess themselves against a data set of leaders around some of the strategies we've seen the most effective founders kind of use to become effective in building their teams. And that is one window of an insight into, well, how do I stack today compared to this global data set of leaders? And that's something that could be a window into the outside, but otherwise, really that day is built for the team to just, look inward and to be a lot reflective on how they've operated as a team.
And in running this workshop, what surprised you the most? What are some of the aha moments for you that you did not expect?
I mean, I can go first. I think the fact that founders and startup leaders are just willing to go along with some of these, what I'm guessing your audience would imagine as we describe the bullshit circle and kind of this list of big issues that we need to start anticipating. Like, this is not an easy day. I think people come in thinking, okay, this is going to be a break from our regular work. It's going to feel comfortable and it's like a retreat. It's actually hard work, but it's a different kind of work from their day to day. And just seeing founders being willing to come along with us on it, trusting the process, and then emerging feeling like, wow, that was uncomfortable and very strange, and yet we're better for it. Yeah, I think has been incredibly, exciting. One of the reasons why we're here today, Chris, is when we first ran this workshop, a very early version of this workshop in Jakarta about 9 years ago now. We found that it actually resonated so well with founders that it was a pretty well sought out part of the entire accelerator program. And then we brought it to different markets around the world, to Bangalore, then to Sao Paulo, then to Warsaw. And at some point, we realized that actually we were touching on, an unmet need that somehow founders have really, hungered for a chance to do this hard work, but in a structured kind of environment, the way we've set it up.
Yeah, that's right on the money with what surprised me most at first. So I've had little surprises happen along the way and still to this day, but what surprised, I think, Martin and I and a lot of the team was that this founder-focused, people-focused content was the most well-received and appreciated content across technical workshops and marketing workshops and what it might be. And once we, what we were kind of told is we have either mentors or we have books or online resources that can teach us these harder skills. But sometimes we're working with a 25-year-old founder in India who's never managed before, suddenly raised $3 million, and they are building something and they've hired 50 people. It's overwhelming. And they're like, I know the tech stack, I understand the market, but I don't know what to do right now. And so they came hungry to us for help, and this was really the genesis of what Martin and I have built here. Ultimately that was kind of the big surprise, the light bulb moment that kind of initiated a lot of our work together. And the book itself was how big of a need there was, and what we've assessed as a bit of a gap in support structure for founders in this domain. And so that was the big surprise. Yeah.
Were there parts of the workshop that were added later on or changed based on things you observed were happening?
Yeah, actually, I can, and I apologize for all the profanity we've used in your podcast so far, Chris. But actually, before the circle, we actually had a different version of that. We called the up circle, and we invited founders to talk about the biggest, I guess, mistakes they've made in the journey. And we found that worked really well because we first launched this program with Series A startups, meaning they had gone through some amount of scaling and some amount of like finding the right product market fit. So a lot of rich stories. And then when we started to offer this workshop to seed stage, like early stage founders who didn't really quite have as many mistakes yet in the bag, if you will, we found that actually it was more useful and more universal to talk about a lot of the self-doubt and insecurity they bring to the work. So that's one big thing. The other thing I would just say is, and Josh has been a huge proponent of this, we've actually taken this workshop beyond the walls of the startup ecosystem. We've brought it to nonprofits and to teams within larger organizations. And surprisingly, it has resonated as well really well. And so that's another thing that we have, that has changed over the years.
And one other thing I'll add is and not specific to the content, but more specific to the duration, which logically meant we sort of reduced the content. But running this, dozens and dozens of times, hundreds of times, through iterations, trial, feedback, we've narrowed things. We've piloted different sort of modules within the workshop, rolled some back, like Martin said, evolved some things. And when we started this, it was 2 days long. And ultimately, like a guiding light for us was that startups are very busy, right? Convincing them to invest the time into a leadership retreat or something that is on the softer side is a bit of a harder sell sometimes. And so it was always important to us that this wasn't a 6-month long sort of stretched out engagement. We need a critical mass to get the biggest bang for buck, right? And buck being time here. And so to that end, like we always challenged how long we could run this in. And we landed on something that we've now run many times, which is a single day. And at first that felt like too tall of an order. It's like, we're not going to get it done in 1 day. Let's try 2, let's try 3, whatever it might be. And in the end, we landed on something really eloquent and beautiful in a single day. And I love that value proposition that we offer is everybody, you can get your team together for 1 day. We're going to walk you through it and you're going to get a lot of value out of it. And that is where it does gear towards startups. But again, not just startups, entrepreneurship, anyone who feels busy, it's like too busy for that. Here we are talking about take 1 day, so it's been very important to us that we came to the audience and to the world with an offering like that. And we will try to remove all the barriers of excuses, right? And to Martin's point, once the process initiates, people buy in pretty quickly and understand that this is of high value. It's getting in the door and then getting people out the door with all the value. So that's one thing I wanted to add as well.
In running this workshop with large organizations, what is different with large organizations that you noticed between them and the startups?
I think they're just a little bit more unwilling to get vulnerable, is what I've found. I think corporate cultures in general kind of stifle a lot of the humanity that teams need to bring to the work. I think in startup ecosystems, there's still this amount of, I can express anger openly, which is part of the problem. But a beautiful part of that is that I can bring so much of my humanity to the work. And there's something about the corporate world that just kills that along the way. I'd say that's the main thing. Otherwise, a lot of these people issues, I mean, they might be called something different in different environments, but for the most part, we need to give each other feedback. We will have conflict that we will come across that we need to resolve. How do we do that? There is some kind of failure point that we could eventually arrive at. Well, let's talk about what could lead to that failure and figure out a way. So all of these ideas and concepts all apply, even if you're not, looking at run rate or looking at your burn rate. Like all these maybe are more specific to startups, but we tell a lot of corporate folks, if you are someone with ambitious big goals and you have a very motivated team and you have a lot of constraints to deliver on those big goals, then you are actually operating like a startup. And all in every company, you will find teams that kind of qualify across those 3 things. And so this process becomes really valuable for them.
Definitely. The biggest people challenge is usually conflict within the founding team when it comes to startups. Would you agree?
I mean, regardless of whether I agree or not, that's what the data shows. And I think what we hope our readers, take out from the book is that, look, Josh and I we are not multi-founders where we've built, otherwise we wouldn't be writing a book. We'd be doing something else. Um, but then it has forced us to lean on the data and to really understand, I can offer my own opinion about this, but really what's better than that is let's look at the data. Let's look at what the evidence shows. So here's what the evidence shows. So we talked about 65% of founders failed, of startups fail because of people issues. And number one is co-founder conflict. And part of the reason for that is a lot of teams will found the company with people who are friends or family. And the reason for this is because at a time when you don't have a product or salary to pay, really the only ones who are willing to believe you and come along this crazy journey with you are probably the people who love you the most, i.e. your family and friends. And you'll see that across, and you'll see that across really successful startups. I think of YouTube, for instance. They were buddies in college. Some even like a mother-daughter or a mother-son duo. Some have really succeeded, and then there's a lot that have failed. The data shows that co-founders that begin as friends and family are the most unstable partnerships. More stable than that are co-founders who find themselves through a kind of interview process where, I know the skill sets I need to partner for, like, let me meet many people. But even more stable than that are co-founders who used to be co-workers before. And the reason for that is when I see someone as a coworker, I see their work ethic, I see the skills that they can bring to the table. And so there's a lot of understanding of the value each one brings. The reason why friends and family are the most unstable partnerships is because that relationship is so much more expensive, if you will. The cost of that relationship is so much higher than if we were just, colleagues or coworkers. And so as a result, because I value, my familiar relationship with you, for instance, Chris, I will hesitate to have those really tough conversations because I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want, awkward Sunday lunches, which, by the way, we've heard a lot of founders talk about how they've had to fire an aunt, and for 3 years after that, there was no Christmas dinner. So, I mean, this is part of, I guess, the reality of, the startup environment.
Last question from me today. And this is the favorite question to ask. It's not related to our discussion so far, but nevertheless, very, very important question. Over the last few years, what were 2-3 aha moments, realizations for each of you that really changed the way you look at life or the way you look at business?
Wow. That's a great question.
That's a good one.
I'll start with the way I look at business. Something that I'll never forget was we launched our accelerator in Lagos, Nigeria. And so I had the good fortune of going to Lagos for 2 weeks and getting that program launched and getting to know a beautiful cohort of founders, just an amazing group of people. And this is true in a lot of emerging markets, actually, but somehow in Nigeria, it struck me the most, was that these entrepreneurs were almost wearing their country's flag on their shoulders in a way. Like they were doing this not just out of some path to have their big exit, right? They were doing it to sort of end financial corruption and make their country a better place. And so it had so much mission-driven angling to it, more than I'd seen, more than I'm used to, around these parts. And so they took what they were doing with a light heart, but they took it very seriously from that angle. And so it just showed me, like, depending where you are, business has a different definition, and motivating factors of why you're in business, it changes. And so I was just very inspired on that trip, and it's changed, it challenges me and how I approach business, but it just broadened perspective a little bit. And I've seen this in other places as well, as we've kind of gone global with this program and that we've built, but that one stood out to me the most in stark contrast. I'm still inspired by that.
Josh, and how did it change the way you approach things?
Yeah, I'd say it increases my empathy for people operating in business environments that might be more challenging than my own. So I think approaching relationships with a slightly different empathy, I can't tell you exact decisions I've made differently, but certainly has broadened my empathy and understanding of what it means to build a business, to be a business person in some of these more challenging environments, and what kind of parts of the person they are brought out in those cases. Yeah.
Thank you.
I love that, Josh. I can share, and it's a fantastic question, Chris. I think the first thing that comes to mind is know yourself and get over yourself. And I think that second part has been the big aha for me, which is, I think it's so self-awareness is so important. Understanding how you impact others is important. How your mind works is important. How you can get the most out of your mind as well is so important. But then at the end of the day, like, that's not you. Like, that's maybe how you operate. And so to ask yourself to operate differently or to change the way you think about certain things is not denying who you are, but it might be a way to just be, a better person, a better human being. And I think that for me, getting to that second part of getting over yourself, I feel is, I think, the path of maturity that I have had to take as an individual, but also the path of maturity that I find I'm coaching a lot of founders and leaders through. The only other thing I would say is I've been really reflecting a lot on, how there's something about our culture around how we kind of support ourselves through certain, like, whether it's mental health challenges or just personal challenges, that I think it's so easy to get really insular about, how do we kind of help ourselves through our goals. And I've just found through being inspired by, so Josh was the one who pulled me into the accelerator program at Google, and just the environment that accelerators in general have. It's very much an ethos of you help yourself by helping others. And I've just really taken that really to heart. And, in moments where I'm feeling especially kind of sad about where I am, or maybe struggling with a certain challenge that I feel I'm not capable of kind of solving, I find that by helping others through their own challenges helps me realize that, one, I do have actually something to give, and I do have some expertise I've built up over the years, and it just helps. I don't know. There's something about it that helps me.
It reminds me of a movie. I think it's called Paying Forward.
Yes.
And I totally agree with you. When we help others, you can feel that it solves something for you as well, gain more energy to do even more. And so I understand. Just this past weekend, I had such a packed weekend with work, but there was someone who really needed help. And so I had a conversation with this person for almost 2 hours. And I really did not have those 2 hours, but I did. And I know I really helped that person. And then I had even more energy to finish all my work because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners learn more about you? Anything you want to share?
Well, bonfiremoment.com is where you can find more on our book and resources. Josh and I are also active on LinkedIn, so that's another place that you can find us.
Thank you very much. Such an incredible conversation.
Thank you, Chris. This was really enjoyable.
Yeah, Chris, thank you so much for having us.
And our podcast sponsor today again is strategytraining.com. If you want to strengthen your strategy skills, you can get the overall approach used in well-managed strategy studies. It is a free download. Go to firmsconsulting.com/overall approach. And if you're currently updating your resume, you can get McKinsey and BCG winning resume free download. Go to firmsconsulting.com/resume PDF. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone, and I will connect with you all next time.